Look at all these games for a second. Now, which one stands out to you? Probably this one, right? Now, hear me out. There's nothing wrong with having a conventional color palette or having your first level be the forest level, but there's definitely something to be said for a game that breaks the mold. That's why today we're going to be playing Luca, Born of a Dream, and we're going to be talking about art style, visual design, and how to make your game stand out. I'm Jack Breen, and this is Hybrid Plays. Luca, as its description on itch.io says, is a hyper-violent mixtape. This is an appropriate summary, given that many things in Luca are album-themed. The levels are called tracks, and the rooms are called verses. Every room in the game actually has its own name, which blows my mind. And there's a special ability that you can perform during combat called a rewind, where you can start a battle from the beginning if things aren't going in your favor. But what is Luca literally? Well, it's a top-down action-adventure RPG with basic Souls-like elements. So why not call it that? Why not just call levels levels and rooms rooms? The answer? Personality. A game with personality stands out, and when you're trying to launch a successful indie game this day and age, standing out is a must. Let's say you're at the grocery store, for example. You're probably not going to remember all the normal, boring people you see walking around. But if you see someone like this, you're probably going to notice them.
You know, I gotta say, they're pretty excellent prices. It's excellent today. It's excellent today. Let me tell you. I'm just letting you know. I'm not gonna end up with egg on my face. No, it's just what I say. I just say eggs. I go around. I tell people I just say eggs.
You're much more likely to remember the dumbass in the egg costume than the middle-aged man with the shopping cart, and that's because the egg is showing personality, and having a personality is a major step towards being remembered. Games get their personality mainly from their aesthetic, which is a word I'll be using a lot in this episode. The aesthetic of a game is made up of many things, including art style, user interface, music, and mood. There's a lot to love about Luca in terms of gameplay and story, but for this episode I chose to focus on Luca's aesthetic as a means of explaining the successful implementation of personality. In other words, Luca looks really cool, and I'm going to show you how you can make your own game look really cool too. The personality of a game is most strongly defined by its major themes. When we look to Luca, the correlation between theme and aesthetic is very strong. Luca is a game about sorrow, fear, and facing your demons. The world of Luca is dark and frightening, and its aesthetic matches those feelings. Let's break down what we're seeing here. Everything in Luca has a scratchy, hand-drawn look to it. This creates a frantic feeling, as there is no order in Luca's artwork. To add to that frantic feeling, many things in Luca are given motion where it normally wouldn't be necessary. Look at this parked train, and the spots on the ground, for example. Another major aesthetic theme is ambiguity. All of the characters and objects in Luca are monochromatic, giving everything a simplified and ambiguous look. Because none of the sprite work is very detailed, we feel like we never truly know what's going on. Like, is this a big crab or that thing from Toy Story? The whole game is also drawn onto a black canvas, making everything feel dark by default. Overall, Luca's main themes have direct links to its aesthetic, with feelings like fear and danger translating into dark, unrefined artwork and frantic animations. Starting with your mood is a common way to find your own aesthetic. Luca's certainly not the first game to do so. Let's look at some other examples. In my last episode, where I talked about Souls-like design and threw 2 television sets out my window, I played Unworthy, which is a game entirely in black and white. Unworthy's major themes are despair and worthlessness, in case you couldn't tell from the title. This is a sad, broken world filled with monsters, ruins, and strange religions. Rather than displaying the landscape in vibrancy and detail, the entire world is shown in depressing, unfeeling grayscale, a perfect match for the game's tone. On the flip side, a game like The Adventure Pals has a much happier tone, and its art style reflects that. The world is colorful and vibrant, characters are cartoonish and noodly, and everyone's got these adorable faces. Games going for a more nostalgic feel will often adapt the art styles of older generations. Cuckoo Castle and Roguelite both take on the 4-color palette of the Game Boy. Titles like Shovel Knight and Bloodstained Curse of the Moon take things a step further by faithfully following the limitations of older consoles. I even made a game with an all-white color scheme. The way I see it, there are 2 ways to apply aesthetic: art style and art content. Unworthy's aesthetic lies in its art style. Everything is in black and white silhouettes. We can assume that the characters probably don't see the world this way, it's just how it's being presented to us. Enter the Gungeon's aesthetic lies in its art content. Everything is gun-themed, the setting, the enemies, the bosses, and even the lore. Checkpoints are revolver cylinders. Common enemies include bullet soldiers and grenades. Even the architecture is gun-themed. Despite all of this, the actual art style of the game is really just basic 16-bit pixel art, with some modern effects thrown in. Enter the Gungeon's aesthetic isn't found in its colors or animation processes, but in what is literally drawn. Its content reflects its aesthetic, whereas with Unworthy, aesthetic is displayed in stylization. Alright, we've talked about the artwork that goes in your game, but now I want to talk about the artwork that goes on top of your game, your UI, user interface. Believe it or not, your UI can be a very effective way to convey your game's personality. User interface by nature breaks the fourth wall. I know that sounds weird, but hear me out. NPCs and enemies talk to the player's character, but user interface talks to the player himself. Menus and text boxes are there to talk to you directly, so if these things are filled with personality, your aesthetic is practically jumping out of the screen at you. Well-designed UI not only shows creativity, but serves as the cherry on top for a fully stylized game. If your game has a papercraft aesthetic, don't just give the player a normal health bar, make it cardboard on strings. Or how about a bullet-themed health display for a gun-themed game? If your game is all about running an RPG-style shop, don't just make boring menus, do what Moonlighter did and give everything a parchment-colored notebook theme. If your game's world is lonely and broken, why not make a rusted, beat-up HUD like Hyper Light Drifter? If your game is about, well, okay, anyway. Think about UI choices that make sense for your game. Dead Space is a horror game, and immersion is a big part in achieving a scary experience. Rather than just displaying a health bar at the corner of the screen, in Dead Space your character's suit has a built-in health indicator. The health bar actually exists in-game, which is very immersive indeed. Gears of War is a very violent, gory game, and its health system goes along with that. Instead of a health bar, the Gears symbol will begin to form in blood on the screen. If it appears fully, that's when you die. This is similar to the Call of Duty franchise. In these games, everything is always shown in first person to keep things immersive, so the developers show damage the way you'd see it in real life, with blood splattering your face and your vision slowly fading to black. The most important aspect of UI is readability. You don't want your aesthetic to keep the player from being able to read the information on screen. Let's look at Unworthy, for example. Everything is black and white in this game, including the HUD. You would think it would be hard to distinguish the health bar from the rest of the game, but there are a couple of smart design choices that were made to prevent that. Mainly, all of the information itself is drawn in white, and none of the backgrounds are ever pure white. The brightest the background ever gets is light gray, meaning that the health bar always stands out from the sky. Pure white itself is actually only used in a few places outside of the UI, like attacks, effects, and fire. In Lucah's case, the UI here follows the game's aesthetic in a way that makes sense. The colors match the game's main palette, and the HUD has that same twitchy animation that is seen in most objects. These health bars didn't need to be animated, but they are, just like the train from before. And like Unworthy, Lucah's UI is perfectly stylish without sacrificing readability. The whites, blues, and reds stand out from the dark and muddy colors of the environment. Subtle touches like the rough, hand-drawn accents around information really help ground Lucah's style. All in all, the aesthetic connections between UI and game do a great job bringing together the personality of the whole experience. And like I said in the beginning, personality can be the difference between standing out and getting lost in the crowd.
Let me tell you, I've seen a day. This one's excellent.
Between art style, art content, color scheme, and mood, there are a bunch of ways to implement your personality of choice, be it dark, funny, or just plain weird. Let's go over the process one more time to wrap things up.
Did somebody say wrap?
No, I didn't. Please put the wrapping paper away. When it comes to personality, the first step is to find an aesthetic that matches your game. To do this, it's best to look at your game's tone and mood, and to ask yourself how you want your players to feel. What emotions are you trying to invoke? The next step is to decide how you're going to invoke those feelings. Will it be through art style or art content? If everything is monochromatic, for example, are the characters aware of this? There's no wrong answer here. It's all about what works best for your game. Keep in mind that different aesthetic choices convey different emotions. A muddy-colored game will seem serious or realistic, while a pastel-colored game is bound to feel much happier. Jagged, sketchy animations like Luca's feel scary, while Shantae's bouncy, rhythmic animations feel upbeat. These choices all take part in making the player feel emotions, and like I said before, feeling is one of the first steps towards remembering. Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching, and special thanks to Storm Hughes and Blueberry Kodiak for becoming HybridPlay's first 2 patrons ever. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for the support. Storm goes by Boxhead on Twitter, and he's making some really cool games, and Blueberry's on there too, making really cool game music, so go ahead and follow those guys if you're into that stuff. And of course, if you want to follow the creators of Luca, I'll have their Twitter handles down below, and I'll have a link to the game's itch page so that you can play it for yourself. Alright guys, that's all for today, so I hope you learned something, and I'll see you all next time. See ya!
Can't make videos in here.
I'm just taking a picture of them.
And you can't do that either.
Okay. I probably shouldn't have told the cat. I thought he was going to say something, so I was going to record him.
Yeah. It's funny.
He's going to do exactly what he wanted us not to do.